us lead the way, criminal justice reform in the states. Glad to have you all here. I know you're expecting Donald Trump, but you got us instead. Yeah, I think you'll enjoy this. A lot of progress being made in the states on this, and conservatives have led the way, and it's really been something that has really brought our, especially CPAC type activists out enthusiastic about. I'm Pat Nolan. I'm the director of the Center for Criminal Justice Reform at the American Conservative Union Foundation, and we work with government officials to help apply conservative principles to criminal justice reform, to try to assist victims, to work with offenders to change their lives, to cut the bureaucracy and get the most public safety bang for the buck for the taxpayers, hold the government accountable as well as the individuals who commit crimes accountable. There are four panelists here. I'll introduce you to them all, and then I'll just start asking questions. But on the left here is Representative Jerry Madden, was in the Texas legislature for years, West Point grad, and an engineer, trained by the finest minds up there at West Point, and he's applied those analytical skills of an engineer to the criminal justice system in Texas, and they've become the model for criminal justice reforms in the state, so it'll be fun to hear Jerry talk about how that came about. Next is Mark Leben, who's the Director of Public Policy for the Texas Public Policy Foundation and founder of Right on Crime, a movement of conservatives supporting criminal justice reform in the states and at the federal level. To my right is Senator Brian Kelsey from Tennessee, the Grand Union of Tennessee, from Memphis, home of Elvis as well as good barbecue, and not far from Tullahoma, home of a great bourbon too. But Senator Kelsey's an attorney.
We prefer Tennessee whiskey, actually.
And what brands are Tennessee? Oh, that's right, Tullahoma is just across the line, isn't it?
No, Tullahoma's in Tennessee.
Tennessee, right.
I'm saying we don't call it bourbon in Tennessee.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We call it
My apologies. Well, my daddy liked it from glass jars, but that's another. Anyway, but Senator Kelsey is the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He served in the House and now the Senate, a distinguished term, and he's also on the governor's task force on something in recidivism.
Sentencing and recidivism.
Sentencing and recidivism, which is going to look at the whole system in Tennessee and try to make it work better for all of us. So I'll start off asking Jerry Madden to describe how Tough on Crime Texas got into the business of reforming their prisons. And so.
Thank you, Pat. Yeah, I'm not a lawyer. I want everybody to know that. I've served in the legislature for 20 years, and in the first 12 of them, I'd never had a corrections bill, never done anything on criminal justice. And one day in January of 2005, the speaker calls me in and looks me in the eye and says, "Jerry, you're going to be chairman of corrections." And I said, "Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I really appreciate that honor." Under my breath, I'm saying, "Oh, God, why me? It's not my area, nothing I've ever done before." And then I asked him the second most important question I've ever asked in my life. I asked him, "Well, Mr. Speaker, what do you want me to do?" And he gave me the 8 words that changed my life, and I think have changed the whole course of conservatism in the states and in this country of where we deal with the criminal justice system. Because he said, "Don't build new prisons, they cost too much." Now, guys, that's a very conservative statement, right? Anybody here think how many of you have correction systems in your area where you hold to that standard that says, we make sure we do it right, but we spend the right amount of money. We don't spend too much doing it. And that was what the speaker was basically telling me. It was, how much does a prison cost? Too much. What's way too much? How about $250 million? About. Maybe some states are more, maybe some are less. How many people do we have incarcerated in the United States in prisons? A whole bunch. It's just under 2 million, probably. Any day it's slightly different. You know how many people come and go to the prisons just of Texas every day, 230, 240. By the way, 230 or 240 leave every day. Because if you have a balanced population, that's what happens to you. Okay? But I didn't know that at the time. I said, okay, what do you do? Well, first thing you do is you go look for somebody else who knows something about this system, because I didn't. I mean, I did know the difference between parole and probation, and that was about it. Okay? I didn't know how many prisons we had. We had 111. But I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know how many juvenile facilities we had. Didn't have the slightest idea on those numbers. But I went out and said, well, who's out there that knows anything about it? And in your legislatures, would you be shocked to know that whether it be the Congress of the United States or whether it be your state legislatures, that the answer is going to be there aren't very many who know anything about the correctional system. Some of them may know some things as lawyers about how they got people in or how they defended others, but what happens after that and what programs that are there and how does probation and how does parole work and all this, they don't know. Most of them don't know anything. Okay? So I went around and I started asking, well, who over here knows anything, particularly on the other side of the Capitol. I went to the dark side of the Capitol, better known as the Senate. Excuse me, Senator. But I went over because I was a House member. I went over to the Senate and I said, okay, who knows anything over here? And all of my conservative friends said, well, there's this one guy. He really knows his stuff. He's not of our party, but in this subject, we trust him. That's John Whitmire. Okay? And they said, okay. Well, I said, well, I'm going to go talk to him. The first thing you ought to do, and any time you're doing stuff in legislation, you better talk. You better be good at listening, too. So I went and sat down with John, and in about an hour, hour and a half, we meshed just like this on this subject. Now, we're not going to vote together. We never did on a lot of other things. But on this subject, we meshed because we had to not build new prisons. How do you stop from building prisons? Particularly if you have forecasts of a lot more people coming. Most states and the federal government had that, so we had that. We started looking at stuff. And we started looking actually at probation. That's where we first went, and we saw the probation departments. And we had some wonderful probation people that came in and told us, gee, we can help you with your problem. All you have to do is give us more money. Anybody think that that's a conservative response to anything? No, that wasn't going to work. Okay, but we did listen to them, at least of what they can do. Because there's some of the stuff you can do without spending more money. In fact, there's some of the things you can do that you spend less money if you did the right things with them. So we started looking at that. We passed a probation bill in 2005, which got all the way to the governor's office, and Rick Perry vetoed it, which is fine. Best thing that ever happened to us, because it made us look then at everything in the system. What's the corrections system look like? Okay, what's in it? Well, I'm going to start at the back end and work backwards. There's a parole element or a reentry element that you have in the system. There's the prisons itself and what they do. There's the events before they go to prison, usually called probation, where they're not bad enough to send directly to jail. There's three places where you get people in your prisons from. You get revocations of parole. That means they got let out and they screwed up and you're sent back. Or they're direct sentenced by the judge, or they violate probation. You know what? In Texas, we had 13,000 people that were going to prison every year because of technical revocations of probation. That didn't mean that they did other crimes, although sometimes they used technical revocations because somebody did and they just wanted to be quicker. But in most cases, it was just, you know what they were? They were people didn't show up for their meetings that they were supposed to have with probation, and or they had dirtier analysis. Well, guess what we had? We had drug addicts. And what's going to happen to a drug addict? I mean, if you don't do something on the drug addiction, he or she is going to go out and either have a dirtier analysis, they're going to take their drugs, or they're just flat know they took their drugs and they know they're going to have a dirtier analysis, so they don't show up. And so we sent them on to prison. Right? So we started looking at there. We looked at the juvenile system. We looked at early childhood. What's the greatest indicator you have of someone as a child that's going to be in prison and when they grow as an adult? Anybody want to guess? Mom and dad were in prison. It may be because they were in poverty, but that's an extension of, they're probably in poverty because mom and dad were in prison, but the real cause was mom or dad or both were part of the criminal element. They could go on to the kids. Okay, that's what happened with us, and that's what started us on our things. 2007 comes up. I better get 2007 real quick. 2007 comes up with our bill. Texas meets every 2 years, and we came up with recommendations at that stage that says these are the things we can do in probation, parole. We can do drug courts, special drug courts, specialty courts additions. We can do things in the prison. We can do a alcoholic treatment program in the prisons. Gee, we got, you know, they're rather more likely to be able to attend an alcoholics class if they're in prison. We can probably get them there to the class, okay? Than if they were out on the outside and they had to show up on their own. We can get them there. So we're taking them to alcoholics classes. We were doing stuff for mothers with the infants. We were doing stuff on certainly on drug treatment, alcoholic treatment programs, and the whole works. That we came in with recommendations on what to do. And the governor had in his budget $530 million to build new prisons. We had, doing our program, we thought we wouldn't have the increase in prisoners that they were projecting. We thought we'd stop them, and at the same time, we cost a lot less than $530 million. And guess what? My appropriators loved that. Appropriation people thought that was a great idea. We spent less money. We gave them $300 million to spend elsewhere, or whatever they wanted to do. Okay, but we saved that amount of money. In the end, when we passed all of that legislation, here it comes out. We have, since that time, we've reduced the crime rate, continued to reduce the crime rate. It's at the lowest level in Texas since 1960s. We have fewer prisons. We closed prisons. And we're safer. That's the thing what Republicans are about. We're about safety, public safety. You know, you get a drug addict who you treat for his addiction, and he come out, because you have a Department of Corrections, you're supposed to be correcting behavior. When they come out, gee, they're less likely to commit the crime than when they went in. That's what you want. You want somebody with a mental health problem, you get the treatment for them, get them on medicines, and maybe change the way they act. What a great idea to make our public safer. That's what we basically did in all our stuff. That was the foundation of all the state drives, because everybody said, how could Texas do that kind of stuff? And lo and behold, many, many states have now followed in our track, many of them led by conservatives, with generally a bipartisan approach, because this is one of the things. I had two think tanks. I had a conservative and a liberal think tank. Mark was in there many times telling us about the conservative side. But we had a liberal think tank, too. And you know what I found? They agreed on 80% of the stuff. So as Mark knows, I told them, go off and figure out that 80%, write the bill on the 80%. I'm not going to do anything with those things on the outside. You know, you guys can argue those if you want to, but I'm going to take those 80%. And the 80% was what worked. And the 80% got you the stuff you needed. So you know what? Texas has a lower prison population than we had at the time we started this. Instead of 17,000 more, we've got about 19,000, 20,000 less. Okay? And we're not spending all that much more money than we used to. So that's what we did. Pat?
Thanks, Jerry. It really has been a model. South Carolina, Georgia, Louisiana, Kentucky, Ohio, Missouri, taking them off the top of my head. Yeah, Utah, South Dakota, other states. You know, that's the brilliance of the founders. You know, the great laboratory of the 50 states under federalism. We can all try different things and see what works. When one works, then others can pick it up. I might just say before I turn it over to Senator Kelsey to talk about Tennessee, what he's talking about, the drug treatment in the federal system, which is by far the worst, only 10% of those with addiction get treated in the federal system. Now, you can lock up somebody for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, but if you don't deal with their underlying addiction, they're still going to be an addict when they get out. And don't let them kid you that there are no drugs in prison. There are plenty of drugs in prison, and they don't come in through visiting as much as you think. It comes in the lunch buckets, because that's how they enhance their income. Yeah. It's a real problem. Texas has it now. If you're a drug addict, you get treatment the next day, either inside or outside prison. That's going to make us more safe than locking them up at $50,000 or $60,000 a year, but not giving them any treatment. Now, in Tennessee, they've started this comprehensive process, which is being led by Senator Kelsey, and he brings a great background to this. And I'd like to hear what he's learning and what their thoughts are on reform there in Tennessee.
Thanks, Pat. Well, in Tennessee, we have decided that we have got to do a better job of focusing our limited resources on our most violent offenders. And that's what we're trying to do. So we are at the beginning of this process. We have decided to go to try to tackle criminal justice reform in a 2-year period. And so the governor has introduced the first bill that is based off of the work that we did on the governor's task force on sentencing and recidivism over the course of the last year. And there were really two big surprises for me that came out of that task force. Number one was that with all of these experts in the room, you've got judges, prosecutors, you've got defense attorneys, you've got a whole host of folks that are in the room. And with all these experts in the room, no one could definitively tell me how long of a sentence a perpetrator was going to serve after a conviction. And that was really shocking to me. The second thing that was really a big surprise was that we learned that 40% of our Tennessee prison population is made up of those who are there for violating probation and parole. So this is exactly what Jerry was talking about, was an issue in Texas, is an issue in Tennessee as well. So those are two of the things that we're trying to tackle. Really, with a lot of the sentences, we have to provide more clarity in our sentencing, but that turned out to be such a big task to take on that we really have put that off until next year to make sure that we do it right the first time. But we have taken a look at some of these other issues in a bill that the governor has now introduced this year. It has not gone through the committee process on the Senate side yet. It has started through the committee process on the House side. But it does address this issue of the probation violations and parole violations. So what it does there is we've learned the lessons from other states that swifter, more certain punishments for probation and parole violations is actually more effective than waiting a year and a half and then having potentially a longer sentence involved. And so we really hope to address that 40% of our population in a way that will actually be more effective in reducing recidivism, and also at the same time will save the state money. That's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, I really compliment you on that, Senator. It's as Jerry will tell you, it's people don't lead torch-lit parades through your district thanking you for that, but those of us involved appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Well, one thing that they might actually, though, as well, is that, as I said at the beginning, I mean, we do have to focus our resources on the more violent offenders. And so it was also shocking to me to learn that we have a lot of crimes that are only 30% crimes, where you only have to serve 30% of your sentence. And then we have several crimes that are 85%. And for the most part, they're usually the violent crimes. But aggravated burglary was a 30% crime. That was shocking to me. So that was one thing that I advocated for very strongly in this task force, that get put into the governor's bill, and I'm glad that he actually took that recommendation, because again, I mean, if someone is breaking into your home with a weapon and causing an actual physical injury to you, then those are the people that we do need to be locking up. So we do have that in this bill as well that I'm really proud of.
Yeah. One of the rubrics we use is prisons are for people we're afraid of, not people we're mad at. And a lot of the probation violators we're mad at. They're knuckleheads. They aren't following the rules. And Judge Aum, a former federal prosecutor who's a state judge in Hawaii, has come up with a program called HOPE. And what he does, he calls them in first day and says, we believe in the rules. We follow the rules here. And we want you to follow the rules. And if you don't, we're not waiting for you to break them 13 times. You come in with a dirty UA, you're going to go straight to jail. Put the handcuffs on and take you to jail. But it's not going to be for 6 years. It's going to be for 48 hours. And you get to sit there and think, are these rules worth staying within, or we got to find them? If you want help, we can get you into treatment. But if you're going to keep violating the rules, then we're going to make it longer each time, and eventually you're going to go in for that. Well, what they've studied at UCLA and Pepperdine, they've cut new crimes by that paroled population, or probationary population, new crimes by 50%, and cut missed meetings with their supervisor 68%, and dirty urinalysis 66%.
And it's real interesting what he does when he gets people in. 50% of the people he has in his court, they don't ever violate. Okay? Never. 50% of those that violate once don't violate a second time. It's always descending. He says of those that violate twice, 50% of them don't ever come in the third time. So he's got a descending curve until he just gets the very real trouble, ones that you have to deal with.
Right.
Really impressive.
Hawaii, and now 17 states have adopted similar programs. Mark Leben is the guy that founded Right on Crime, had a brilliant inspiration, and he's a director of policy there at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And Jerry said that he meshed with Senator Whitmire. I was in Austin for a conference at the University of Texas, and somebody said, you ought to look up Mark Levin while you're there. We went to a great Mexican restaurant there, which here in D.C. they don't have any, so it was nice to go there. Anyway, and we hit it off the same way. We just meshed. We were like, twins separated at birth. Anyway, so Mark has done this in several states. I'd like you to talk about the resistance you've had as well as what has worked, because it hasn't always been easy in the States.
Well, thanks, Pat. And Pat was instrumental from day one in building Right on Crime, getting people like Newt Gingrich, who are friends of his, to sign our statement of principles, which I hope you have seen. But I wanted to pick up also on something the senator said about, the parades, or you mentioned the parades. What was interesting is, and what's really changed since I started working on this issue back in 2005, is that you saw Governor Deal campaign on this in his reelection. Governor Kasich, Governor Deal sent out mail pieces talking about how he had reduced the number of people in prison, and at the same time, Georgia had better public safety. And of course, we've done some polling, as have other organizations like Pew, and they found, including among conservatives, that 80%, for example, support alternatives to incarceration for low-level drug possession offenders. And indeed, as we've looked at the crosstabs in these polls, those who identify as Tea Party Republicans are even more supportive than the average Republican. So very interesting. But it goes back to, I think, that this is another area of government, just like healthcare, education, and that means that we need to be skeptical of government. And of course, unlike most things government does, public safety is actually one of the few legitimate functions of government, so we need to do it. But we need to do it in an efficient manner. And so, and I think also the other part of this that really brings people in is the idea of keeping families together and recognizing that no person's beyond redemption. Now, of course, there's people that are incorrigible that have to be in prison for the rest of their life, or in Texas they may be executed. But thankfully, the vast majority of folks coming into our prisons, over half of those entering prisons are nonviolent offenders. Now, within that, it's complicated. You might have somebody who's done 20 burglaries, right? And you've tried everything else with them. But a lot of the people are indeed low-level drug offenders, shoplifters, people who wrote a hot check, and so forth. And one of the things we've really emphasized from the beginning is if you stole from someone, you need to make restitution and also do community service and so forth, and hold a job. There's a phrase, 3 hots and a cot. And so, every time we put somebody in jail or in prison, they're riding in the wagon of us as taxpayers instead of helping pull the wagon. So I think that as you look at it throughout the country, one of the most successful processes has been this justice reinvestment process, where you get judges, prosecutors, victims advocates, other experts all together and look at the data of who's going into the prison system, how long they're staying, what programs are working and what aren't. And this process is going on this year in states like Alaska, Maryland, Kansas on the juvenile side. And by the way, we haven't talked about juvenile justice, but juvenile incarceration in the United States over the last 15 years is down 40%. And juvenile crime continues to plummet. Now, it's still a problem, obviously, but the reason is really, of course, not only is it going to be $350 a day to lock up a juvenile, but it's also states have seen the programs that are closer to home that work with the family, that strengthen that family's ability to discipline and monitor the child. Those are the ones that really get the best results and also a lot less expensive. So one of the other issues we work on is overcriminalization, which is kind of starting at the beginning and saying whether things, we need all these criminal laws to begin with. And at the federal level, there's over 4,500 criminal statutes. Dick Thornburger said there may be as many 300,000 federal regulations with criminal penalties, and the average person can't figure out what's against the law. And of course, in Texas, we have identified 11 felonies relating to oysters. I was just appointed to a commission where we're going to go through all these 2,000 crimes and figure out which ones we don't need anymore. Well, it's a good talking point. That's why we're a little hesitant to get. No, we're going to get rid of them. But yeah, it's and so we really, I think we dilute. I mean, criminal law. as bad as excessive taxation is, when the government can take away your liberty, and of course civil asset forfeiture, take away your stuff without a conviction, but take away your liberty, nothing is more serious than that. And so the idea that legislators will just keep adding on criminal laws willy-nilly on things that have no relationship to public safety, just to as a tool to regulate business or recreational behavior, all sorts of things, that we've really gone overboard. And so I think that there is a growing realization that that simply more criminal laws and tougher penalties for things that aren't a threat to public safety is not the way to go. And as Senator Kelsey said, obviously there are people, and thankfully it's not that large a number, but who do need to be incapacitated. The one thing prison does well is it keeps people from committing another crime, at least outside of prison. But it is by reserving it for those that are truly a danger to public safety and doing these alternatives, whether it's drug courts, electronic monitoring. There's now non-narcotic treatments for heroin addiction that block the receptors in the brain. And so I think all of us would say if we had a family member who was in one of those situations with an addiction or a mental illness, that's what we would want for them. So that's what we should want for everybody else. And so I really think we're going to continue to see more progress on this issue as we go forward.
Yeah, I'd like to emphasize what Senator Kelsey said too, and this fits in with over-criminalization. We've so watered down the criminal law. There are so many things that are criminal. We've lost the focus on the things that are inherently evil: robbery, rape, murder, arson. Those are things. When Cain killed Abel, there was no statute against it. It was against God's law. You knew in your heart, it's imprinted on our souls, that these are evil things. Now, driving on the right side of the street versus the left probably doesn't fit into that, but that's just a law of convenience. But a lot of them, as far as like putting sand in a puddle on your property, miles from any river or lake or ocean, can still be a felony under federal law. They've gone after people on that. Lobstermen who catch lobsters off the Honduran coast, totally legal in the United States, but apparently putting them in plastic bags rather than cardboard was alleged to be, by the U.S. Attorney, a crime under Honduran law. Honduras wrote and said, no, it's not. That regulation was invalid, yet they prosecuted them, took their boat, and put two of the men in prison, two brothers, one for 8 years. Now, he's taking up a bed and resources. The family lost the support for something that at worst would be a fine, or should be a fine. That bed should be reserved for somebody that's done the basic, inherently, in legal term, malum per se, things that are evil in and of themselves, not just because the majority of the regulators think it should be. And that's the point we've gotten. We're saying, let's get back to the basics. Let's keep those folks locked up, but also treat them decently, because unless we're going to don't care what they're like when they get out, they're eventually going to get out. We want to make sure they're good neighbors, so we want programs for them. Working with Chuck Colson for 15 years, I really saw the chance to redeem and change people from the inside. But frankly, all we need is a prison system to allow that to happen. It shouldn't be the prison system that does that, but allow our volunteers to go in and work with people. So this is something that virtually every state is confronting. The states can't print money like the federal government, so they have to live within budgets. And so it forces us to set priorities. And I think that's what Senator Kelsey's trying to do, is say, given the money we have, what's the best way to spend it? Now, we'd like to open it up to any of you for questions or comments. Yes?
My name's Janice Walt Grenadier. 10,000 people go to jail every year who are innocent. I went to jail. I was jailed for 22 days, 14 days in solitary confinement and torture, so Senator Tom Warner could be reelected. I was held in solitary confinement till 5 o'clock on election day. I have complaints all over. In the Senate Ethics Committee, on the heels of the RNC. I have complaints with the judiciary system and the bar judges sit there and make their deals. These judges are paid off. The lawyers are sign an oath that they will treat the judge like God. So when they even go in to protect your rights, you're not being protected.
What were you charged with?
$8,100 in legal fees for lawyers who had lied in court.
Oh, no, but I mean, what was the charge?
$8,100 in legal fees. And when the judge had to let me out, he turned to the other lawyers and said, "I'm so sorry, I have to let her out early. I can't collect your legal fees for you."
Okay, but what I mean is, what criminal charge did they?
$8,100.
You're not paying your fees.
There is no criminal charge. My order reads is $8,100 in legal
You were
fees.
jailed for not paying your lawyer.
Not my lawyer, my ex-husband and my ex-mother-in-law. I was in there because they wanted me committing suicide when I got out. They woke me up every night. They've hired people to harm me. They've hired twice. I've been beat up. They hired, the judge ordered for me to be found incompetent, and they hired a gentleman who was to drug me and get inappropriate sexual pictures, rape one of my girls, or plant drugs in my house. I have an unopened box of evidence that was taken out of my file, that I have a picture of when I went into the courtroom, through the court to make sure my documents were in my file, that they said, "You can take them or we're going to throw them out." I refused to take them, so they mailed them back to me. The box is unopened, and it's all being ignored. And in Virginia,
Yeah.
one other thing, we have Michael Gardner. Michael Gardner molested 3 young girls. Michael Gardner was a Democratic fundraiser, raised funds for Clinton, McAuliffe, Mark Warner, all of them. Our Supreme Court justice let him out of jail after he was found guilty for molesting these 3 young girls. He got out of jail, he immediately tried to hire someone to murder him. Left these 3 young girls. Luckily, our FBI stepped in, and that is the only person since 1999 that our Judicial Inquiry Committee has retired.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear about your case, and I think speaks to a broader issue of prisons being used as debtors' prisons. If somebody can't, if there's a dispute between somebody as far as, whether they paid them or not, that's a civil matter. It's absurd that should lead to being incarcerated. So there are a lot of people, who also are put in jail because they haven't paid their court costs or their probation fees or their fines, which is a similar issue. And I know, for example, there have been issues in some states where, we're not supposed to have debtors' prisons in this country. So if you can't pay a creditor, you shouldn't be in jail. But what they can do is subpoena you, and if you don't show up for the deposition, then they can get a warrant issued and get you in jail. So there's places where that's going on. There's places where prosecutors have sent out letters on their letterhead to effectively intimidate people, make it look like because really what they're doing is collecting debt for some private company, but it's coming out on the letterhead of a prosecutor. So I think we need to be very careful about these things. I hope you're able to get some justice.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I have a question regarding the drug rehab programs that you have. I mean, when someone is actually released from prison and put on probation, do you have any like drug rehab or halfway houses that you support? Because a lot of these drug addicts, when they're released, they have nowhere to go. They're alienated from their families, they have no way to earn any money, and the only solution they have is to go back on the streets and either deal drugs or get drugs. So
Yeah,
is there-
Jerry can talk about Texas. One of the problems with the federal system is they don't. In the Second Chance Act, there were a lot of monies given to governments for reentry programs, but they didn't expand halfway houses. Literally, you haven't built one new halfway house since it passed, and that just seems absurd to me. That you need that transition from the structured life of prison to freedom. And frankly, one of the things we found that really works are mentors. Local volunteers. Sam Brown back in Kansas has recruited 5,000 mentors, mostly from local churches, but it takes all comers, 5,000 mentors who will walk with the inmate as they get out, help them get a driver's license. We're all frustrated by the DMV. Yeah. Think if you've been locked up all that time and you don't have a birth certificate, how do you get that? So the mentor helps with that, helps them with their job, deal with any issues. The employers don't like to interface with parole or probation. The mentor helps do that. If they're getting angry at work, says you got to settle down, you know, you're going to lose the job. You know, it helps deal with them with issues. If they're having trouble with their ex, not making support payments, saying you got to make these payments, you know, and they're sort of their conscience, Jiminy Cricket, if you will. And the probation officers love them because these guys are able to, mostly men, because it's mostly men prisoners, are able to get the inmates, ex-offenders, to do better when they get out than just leaving them on their own. Did you want to say something, Sam? No, okay. Jerry, you want to talk about
Just real quickly, in Texas, we added an additional safe halfway houses into our system. It's certainly, they're absolutely essential. Fact is, though, they're usually very poorly placed within the community because who wants them next to their house? As, you know, if you ask my good liberal friends, well, why do we put them right next to your home? You know what they'll say, and I know, but blank no. Okay, don't not my, you know, not my neighborhood. So, but you got to have them someplace, and you got to have facilities for them and the opportunity for them to, you know, reintegrate back in. So we recognized that early in the process, and we did obviously expand the number of halfway houses within our facilities. Yes.
Now, my son had a drug issue, so he ended up in a halfway house. It wasn't in a very nice area of Pittsburgh
Right.
either.
Okay.
But I don't view that as a problem.
Yeah.
I view that as a teaching lesson.
It's an opportunity. Sure. Sure.
You know, this is where
Sure.
you're gonna end up
Sure.
if you don't get your life together.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't view that as a problem.
No, and it's a get your life together message that says if you come about, if you can in fact be redeemed, it can be redemption for you in the programs. And so you want to make sure the major thing you want to do with all your rehab programs that you have is make sure they're working, make sure the process is done correctly, and that they're working. Because you know what, you'll never get 100% success with people we're dealing with. It's an impossibility unless you're not measuring anything important. But if you're measuring the things that are important, like are they off drugs, are they, you know, getting a job, are they working, are they providing for themselves, you know, for their families, then if you measure them, you've got to have programs that actually do that. We have substance abuse treatment programs throughout the state, 6 to 9 month programs, even for the guys who go off on probation and go off the wagon. We don't automatically put them back to finish their whole term. We put them into short-term substance treatment programs.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about the halfway house is you're expected to, as time goes on, pay more and more of your room and board as you gain employment. So it's a gradual transition. And we've done several things in Texas to make it easier for people to get a job, including saying employers can't be sued for negligent hiring, for hiring ex-offenders, letting them get occupational licenses, at least provisional ones, where they can start working, and they otherwise would be denied based on their conviction. I mean, for a while we were paying with our tax dollars to train people to cut hair in prison, but then they couldn't get a license.
Yeah. Let me just make this final statement, man. You're the reason he'll do well. A family, an intact relationship is the most important factor on successful transition. Your love is important. So thank you. And thank to the panelists so much for doing this.